Every morning I wake up. I turn on the shower, I let some water run down the drain as it heats up, and I start my day. Throughout the day, I use the toilet about 10 times, a little bit higher than average, as there's currently another human sitting on my bladder. And each of those times I wash my hands. When I get home from work, I make dinner, which oftentimes requires rinsing vegetables and always, unfortunately, requires doing dishes. My point is, we all come into contact with water multiple times throughout the day. The average Westerner uses 200 liters of water every single day. And I would bet that not many of you consider where your water is coming from when you flush the toilet. This reality isn't true for all parts of our world. A third of the global population suffers from water scarcity for at least 1 month of the year. Water scarcity can be defined as the lack of sufficient available fresh water to meet demand. And to make matters worse, if we continue using water as is, there'll be a 40% freshwater deficit by 2030. Water scarcity affects all continents on this earth, but it doesn't affect them all equally. Africa suffers more so than other regions of the world, but it's not necessarily because there's a physical lack of fresh water. Africa suffers from economic water scarcity, meaning that the region is lacking in water management and water infrastructure. This means that if there were investment in the development of a sustainable water system in Africa, this map may look very different. But let's get back to that in a minute. In Africa, a significant portion of the population has to travel outside of their homes every single day to obtain fresh water, especially those in rural areas. And if we look at the most water-stressed countries in the region, it is overwhelmingly the burden of women or girls to complete this task. Water scarcity is sexist. To fully paint this picture, these women are traveling an average of 4 miles, or 6.5 kilometers, carrying 40 pounds, or 18 kilograms of water on top of their heads. They're traveling through rural areas that are oftentimes not shaded in average summer temperatures of 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 40 degrees centigrade. Did any of you ever have to walk with a textbook on top of your head when you were a kid to improve your posture? Imagine walking with 10 of those textbooks stacked on top of your head for over an hour in the hottest summer heat imaginable. Now, while these women are out fetching water, their male counterparts are gaining an education or seeking other life skills that they can be compensated for. They're learning to become active members in their communities, not just in their households. And while the burden of fetching water lies mostly on women, not younger girls, there is a ripple effect. Young girls are often asked to stay home from school to watch their siblings while their mothers are out fetching water. Studies completed in Ethiopia showed that only 3% of female students arrived to school on time, with 20% never arriving at all. And when asked why their daughters weren't enrolled in school, nearly half of respondents said it was because they were responsible for fetching water. This excuse was used 6 times more often than the excuse of sickness, which is the most common reason for absenteeism in most of the United States and Europe. From a physical standpoint, these journeys can be hard on women's bodies as well. They're not as well equipped to carry heavy loads over long journeys, so they can experience increased back or neck pain or have an increased risk for headaches from carrying the water on top of their heads. How many of you have been pregnant? These women are making these journeys with a child in utero or an infant strapped to their backs. I don't know about you all, but I'm 5 months pregnant, and I get winded carrying laundry up a flight of stairs. And the negative impacts don't end there. These women are making these journeys through rural areas, and they're often doing so in the early hours of the day because it's cooler and because it allows them to have water for cooking, cleaning, and consumption throughout the day. But this puts them in harm's way. If there's any sort of main path that can be traveled, women have to stray from it to relieve themselves. which puts them at risk for physical or sexual assault. The same is true for the area where the water is located. Since it's known as a large gathering place for women, it's often targeted for these types of attacks. I want to share a story with you. Grace and her sister Sarah live in a small village in Uganda, not far from Lake Victoria, where they travel to get water every single day for their household of 14 people. Grace is 14 years old, and her sister Sarah is just a year older. And the girls typically go for water every day after school when they get home. But one day, Grace had to stay late. So when she got home, her sister Sarah had already left to get water without her. So when Grace got home, she dropped her book bag and she picked up her jerry can and she headed on the 2.5-mile journey to the lake. And as she made her way there, she scanned her path for snakes or crocodiles and she tried to walk loudly to scare them off if she could. When she got to the lake, she filled her jerry can, she put it on top of her head, and she headed home. And on her way back, she came across 4 men standing in her path. And she tried to walk around them, but they wouldn't let her. One of the men grabbed her wrist. Another one put his hand over her mouth to muffle her screams. And 3 of those men held her down while the 4th one raped her. Now, when Grace finally got away, she went to a nearby village and she explained what had happened. And some of the local men scoured the area for the attackers, but it was too late. They'd already gotten away. They were fishermen from a nearby village that had intentionally docked their boat and waited for a girl to come by. And the worst part was, this wouldn't be the last time that this would happen to someone from Grace's village. All because they were trying to get water for their families. This is just one story shared by Charity Water, and there are way too many more just like it. So it's obvious that water scarcity is significantly impacting women in Africa, but how does this relate to the rest of us? Well, the population is growing fast. In most of our lifetimes, the population will double. It's expected that there will be 10 billion people on this earth by the year 2050. And these new members of our society will need to eat. Africa contains over half of the world's unused arable land. But more importantly, the land that's currently being used for agriculture in Africa is significantly less productive than the global agricultural output. And the reason for this is that Africa's crops are primarily rain-fed, making them particularly susceptible to global climate change. So where do we go from here? Investment in the local agribusiness and local water infrastructure will help farmers to improve their technologies and increase their yield. This development of water infrastructure requires the input of the people most affected by water issues in the region: women. Yet women are often pushed out of community planning or political conversations because it isn't seen as their place. But not letting women sit at the table is like asking somebody who's never been in a vehicle before to design a new sports sedan. It doesn't make any sense. Giving women a seat at the table allows economies to develop in ways that will let them function properly. And while we're developing this water infrastructure, why stop there? Why not add capacity for industry growth as well? Now you may be thinking, wait a second, let's just get this food thing under control. But let's give Africa a little more credit. Virtually no African homes have landlines, and that's because there simply isn't the infrastructure to support it. Yet between the years of 1999 and 2004, the number of cell phone subscribers in Africa grew by 58% per year, making it the fastest growing market globally. So it's obvious that this region is capable of fast-paced, large-scale growth. And this investment in water infrastructure will have great impact. Women will be given more time to seek an education or to develop other life skills that can help them contribute economically. Improved irrigation will help farmers to increase their yield, which will allow them to feed the African population using the farmland that currently exists, but it'll also allow them to feed the growing global population by exporting fresh food, helping both the African economy and the growing global economy. And all of the pieces to this puzzle already exist. We have to consult women as water management systems are created and communities develop. This will lead to increased agricultural yield, improvement in women's education, global food security, and economic development. All of these things are connected. Water scarcity, women's education, economic development, global food security. This is what you call a sustainability nexus. And if we recognize the interconnectedness of it all, we can create a more resilient future. Not just for us, but for the future generations. Thank you.